Good afternoon, Facebook family and friends. Pastor Robert here with you for today's edition of the Parsons Study, a twice weekly devotional broadcast on Tuesday and Thursday at noon. We publish that here and also on YouTube at Glade Spring Baptist Church and on the Parsons Study channel there. And if you'd like more information about us and about our church, I would invite you to visit our website at www.gladespring, that spring is singular, one spring, gladespringbaptist.org. But I wanted to look again at the book of James this afternoon. We'll be in James 3, beginning in verse 13. And for those of you that heard my message Sunday, this may sound a bit like it, but perhaps from a different perspective. But, I look around at everything going on in the world today around us, the divisiveness, the strife, the fighting, the riots, the politics, and I wonder, gosh, where are our founding fathers when we need them? Where are those great statesmen of the past that seem to possess such wisdom that they could craft a government that could last as long as ours and be as successful as ours? And I wonder, wow, where are those people today? And I came across a quote another pastor shared by Martin Luther King Jr., and I didn't write it down exactly, but today we need leaders that aren't focused on money, but are focused on humanity. And I think about the founding fathers, and particularly so James Madison, who I think is one of the unsung heroes of the founding of America, because he sat down and almost secluded himself away and studied every form of government, every great civilization that had ever existed, and almost single-handedly he crafted the framework for our United States Constitution, the framework for our government that would go on to be so successful. And I don't mean this as an indictment of the founding fathers. I think they were brilliant in their wisdom, but they were not infallible. They had issues as well. One of the great things they left unsolved was the issue of slavery, which would not ultimately be resolved for almost another 100 years with the end of the American Civil War. But with that in mind, let's take a look at James chapter 3, beginning in verse 13. And there James writes, "Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." Impartial and sincere. Where do we find impartiality these days? It seems everybody has their own opinion, their own agenda, what it is that they're seeking for their own self, their own benefit. And James asks the question, and some scholars here think James is speaking primarily to teachers in the church. Others perceive that he's speaking both to teachers and the lay people in the church, and yet others perceive that he is speaking to the entire nation of Israel. And whether that's the case or not, I certainly think his words are applicable to any nation, especially to our nation. Who is wise and understanding among you? And then he goes on to say, by his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. What James is saying here, Wisdom is not in so much in what we know, but rather wisdom is in what we do. Wisdom isn't in our knowledge. Wisdom is in our actions. And then he goes on to name two sources of wisdom. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast and be false to the truth. And James is saying here, these people aren't necessarily being false to an idea or to a person. They are being false to the truth. They are in contention with the truth of God. They are in rebellion to the truth of God. It's not just people or ideas they're being false to. It is the very truth of God they are being false to. And that sort of wisdom comes down not from above, but that sort of wisdom is earthly. It's unspiritual. That sort of wisdom, driven by selfish ambition, driven by greed, driven by personal desire, whatever we want to say of it, that's of the devil. That is of Satan. That is not of God. That is not wisdom that comes from God. Verse 16, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. And I think we can look around us today and easily see the result of that, because that's the wrong sort of wisdom. That's worldly wisdom. That is demonic wisdom that drives the self, drives ambition. But the wisdom from above, James goes on, is pure. It's the wisdom of God. It is pure, then it is peaceable. It's gentle. It doesn't demand its own way. It's gentle. It's open to reason. It's open to other points of view. It's open to embrace others and include others, not just the self, and not to exclude others. Wisdom from God is full of mercy and good fruits. It results in good actions. It results in honorable behavior. The wisdom from above is impartial. It's sincere. It seeks the good of all, not just the good of self. So again, wisdom can be of the world. It can be driven by evil, simply the evilness in the world. It can certainly be driven by Satan, the ruler of this world. But then there's pure wisdom, not what we know, but what we do. And wisdom from God, I think we could say, is the union, the intersection, if you will, of truth and love. Wisdom is the intersection of truth and love. We cannot have one without the other. It isn't simply the wisdom, the intelligence of man. And in that last verse, 18, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. I think what James is saying here, the idea he's trying to get across is, if we are to prepare our generation, certainly, but if we are to prepare future generations to reap the bounty of peace, to give them peace, to give them a legacy of peace, we are going to have to sow the seeds of peace ourselves. It's almost like a seed to go out and be planted. The truth of God, the seeds of peace, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace. So that's what we're to do. We are to prepare for this harvest of righteousness by sowing peace in the world. It is sown in peace by those who make peace. So my hope for us today, in closing, my prayer for us is that we will not join the contentiousness and strife and self-seeking of the world, but rather we would be peacemakers, that we would pursue the truth of God, not the truth of the world. We would pursue the wisdom of God, not the wisdom of mankind, and that we would be peacemakers, we would be sowers of peace. So I thank you for joining me today. I'll look forward to seeing you again on Thursday, but go and be sowers of peace. Go out and help prepare the world to reap this harvest of righteousness. So thank you again for being here with me today, and I hope that God blesses you and you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you again.